Atari, the only company that was building these arcade machines. And I looked at this Pong game, and I was mesmerized. I couldn't believe it. For me, the world changed that day. The world was going to go into a new phase of technology that would never come out of. And as I looked at the machine, I said, I could never afford anything. I had no money. But I looked at it and I said, I can build one of these. I was smart enough to design my own Pong game and put signals into my television at home. And put the signals in that would display paddles and balls. I knew how to do that. So I went and I built my own little Pong game with about 28 $1 chips. Very inexpensive, very easy to build. And I started showing it off to friends. Around that time, Steve Jobs came back from college. And I showed him my Pong game that I had built. What does he do? He runs down to the company Atari, which was located in the town I live in now, Los Gatos, California. And he applied and got a job there. That's the sort of person he is. When he sees something interesting, he wants to go in that direction. So he was at Atari, and I would come down once in a while to visit. Steve came to me one day and he said the owner of Atari Corporation, building these arcade games, wants a game design, but he wants you to do it. Because he's tired of his engineers designing games with 150 chips, 200 chips. They were getting too huge, too complex. And this owner of Atari knew that I designed things with very few chips. In fact, he had tried to hire me, and I told him, no, I'm going to work at Hewlett-Packard my entire life. I believe in engineers as the good people of the world. Hewlett-Packard is full of engineers. Engineers are respected in Hewlett-Packard, and I can be an engineer for life there. I will never leave Hewlett-Packard. But I did take this job. Steve Jobs said, he wants to design a one-player Pong game. It became known as Breakout, where the ball knocks the bricks away, you have a paddle, and many of you have seen that game. And then I said, sure, it would be the highlight of my life to design something, a game, that kids would play. And then Steve said, well, there's a hitch. It has to be done in 4 days. It turns out that Steve needed some money. So this was the second time, let's see, the first time he came to me for a design, I designed something, he said, let's sell it. It was a device in college that could make 3 phone calls. So he said, let's sell it, and we did. So this was the second time, and I didn't think we could do this game in 4 days. Games were not software back then, they were hardware. Very difficult process to design hardware to put out television signals that show up on your screen, and it normally would take like 6 months. But I said I would try. 4 days and 4 nights without sleep. Steve and I both. We both got the sleeping sickness, mononucleosis, but we delivered the game to Atari and got paid for it. While I was there in a very sleepless state, it's a state where your mind wanders. Your mind and your thinking is much freer than normal. It's like when you're falling asleep, you think of very creative thoughts that sort of couldn't be. Except sometimes people like to say, maybe it could be. Maybe it could be real. And one of the ideas that popped in my head, I saw a little display on the factory floor, had a black and white TV with Mylar overlays, yellow, blue, green, red. The ball seemed to be changing colors like a rainbow. And I was so tired and half asleep, and it mesmerized me. And it was a beautiful thing in the world. The color was beauty. And then I started thinking about it, and an idea popped in my head for a little $1 digital chip that could actually output signals that looked just like color TV, which normally cost $1,000 to add to a computer of any type. And I filed that idea away, which was going to be very important for the world. So we delivered Breakout, and we got sick, and the next thing Steve and I did together, went down to visit a friend. And sometimes the interesting people, the most interesting creative people, are the ones that misbehave a little. And this was a guy who was sort of known for his misbehavior with phone phreaking. He was named Captain Crunch. But there he was, typing on a huge teletype machine like the military has. You type in and it types back, clunk, 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 very slow process. And he said, I'm playing chess with a computer in Boston, across the country. Wow. Visions of power went into my list of about 12 computers. Berkeley, Stanford, UCLA, MIT, and other colleges like that. We could bring them up on the screen, and I could log into any one of them as a guest and run programs. And I thought, this is just the most unbelievable thing in the world. And I said, I have no money, but I could build one of those. I'm already using my television set for games. Why don't I use my television set for the output from a computer? The display. It's the only output device you'll ever find that's free. Back then, any printer, any teletype would cost at least as much as a car. So what young engineer could afford that? And then I bought a keyboard for $60, and I designed a circuit that I could type on my keyboard, and it would talk to the computer in Boston. And the computer in Boston would talk back to my television. And I called this little device a TV terminal. And I showed it to my friends like Steve Jobs, and I showed it to other friends. And Steve Jobs said, there's companies that rent out the big expensive teletypes to companies, and they lease them for a huge amount of money. But your terminal is so cheap, it's so inexpensive. Maybe we could sell it to them. But once again, we wound up selling it to this local time-sharing company. And that was great. The next step, Steve Jobs wasn't involved in. He might have been out of the state for a while, but it was a club startup of people interested in video terminals and things. And I thought I would go down, and I was too shy to talk to people. But when I showed off my great designs, engineers would talk to me, and then I got to talk. That was what brought out my socialization. So I thought I'd go down and be a hero with my little design. I'd give it away to anybody who wanted it. Here's how you can build a terminal to talk to this thing called the ARPANET, the forerunner. It was the forerunner of what we now call the internet. And I went down there and I discovered something else. Everybody in the garage, about 25 of us met in a garage one night. Dark, the garage door was open, it was raining outside, and we met there, and everybody else knew there were these little kits called computers based on a new chip called a microprocessor that was affordable. Somehow you could actually afford to buy a big front panel, a bunch of parts that you soldered together yourself and built your own computer. They called it a computer. It was the starting basis of a computer. It was roughly equivalent to the little computer I had built myself 5 years before when I met Steve Jobs. So I was embarrassed because I didn't know about these microprocessor chips. I'd been working at Hewlett-Packard on calculators for too long. Well, programming, how to make them work for you back when no one had a computer at home, and we all wanted our own computer. We didn't like the fact that the computers were so expensive that the companies owned the computer and made us always aware that it was not ours and we wanted our own. We had a lot of great dreams of how these computers were going to revolutionize society. All of a sudden, the person who knew how to write a program, like all of us, who were poor little engineers at the bottom of the org chart, we were going to go into our companies, plug in the financial data, calculate some financial numbers, and have better information than their big, huge, multi-million-dollar computers with their high-paid programmers and all. We were going to be more important than the CEOs in our company. What an incredible dream to motivate a person. Any teacher will tell you it's much more important to motivate than even the content that you actually teach. We talked about education, how children in school read a book, but they only use 10% of their mind. Well, now with computers, the computer would present the information, and the child could type back. It was interactive, and then the computer could correct them and explain to them what was wrong and what the right answer was. And they would learn so much better, they would now use 100% of their brain. And I was very scared that in a few years, all these kids were going to put all the adults out of business. I was very scared. But I actually believed all these things. We talked about how people were going to be able to, with a modem, leave a message on another big computer, and hundreds of people could read the message. It would allow us to organize things like peace marches and things like that. A lot of academics from places like Stanford and Berkeley attended our club and spoke of these